What's going on, you loyal listeners? Thank you for tuning in to the L Squared podcast. I'm your host here, Luke Larson, and joining me today, as per the unusual, my lovely and loquacious special guests will be assisting me in leisurely launching you into levity from the new film Rideshare, showing at the South Dakota Film Festival right now, director Nate Hapke and writer-producer Rosie Grace. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Oh,
whoa.
Look at that.
Jeez.
Are we in sync or what?
Yes.
No,
This is great. The chemistry is there. You can tell.
You'll have to tell us.
So I loved Rideshare.
Oh, yay. That makes us so happy to hear.
Good. It was so much fun, and it's cool to it's hard to make a rom-com. I feel like, and there's never a lot of rom-coms that get in, and I'm a little bit stricter on rom-coms, I'll say, but I loved yours. I was just like, how has this concept never been thought of before? It's so brilliant. But I'll go over the synopsis for our loyal listeners here. So, in an effort to be more social, two friends find themselves consistently sharing rides to and from their friends' events. Along the way, their casual friendship begins to deepen into something decidedly more complicated. So how did you guys come up with this story?
So well done.
Like so many things, It was inspired by real life.
Yeah.
A, weird moments shared in the back of an Uber, and B, in addition to being creative partners, Nate and I are also a couple. And we had this whole plan to shoot a different film. It was going to be proof of concept for a feature. It was a much bigger budget. And it sort of, at the end of the day, shook out that if we were going to make that bigger budget short film, we might as well just made a feature at that rate. It just wasn't feasible.
The cost of production for that short film that we were looking at, and to Rosie's point, it was like, well, if we have that budget, let's just make a feature. And we didn't have the budget.
We did not have that budget.
For me, it was like, well, we have to make something. And I was, not that I was struggling to find ideas, but I just wasn't really necessarily inspired by anything that I had. And Rosie turned to me and she was like, well, what about this? And she pitched me this idea. And
I'd had the idea for a while because Nate and I had at that point collaborated on two films, one that I wrote and one that he wrote. And we were sort of looking at what the next one's going to be, and we knew that I wanted to write it. And I had been kicking around this idea literally since we had started dating, well before we'd been working together, because we shared so many moments building to our relationship in the backseat of an Uber. And I remember thinking how funny and how strange it must be for Uber drivers to be fly on the walls in those moments. And what if they participated? And suddenly this idea of seeing all of these different scenes from an evolving relationship in the same place was so interesting to me. Yeah. And so I was like, Nate, I've pitched you this before, never in like a let's make it sort of way, but what if we made this? And I'm so glad I did, because it's been lightning in a bottle, this one.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say sort of fly on the wall for the drivers. It was also so much of, because Rosie pitched me the idea and I loved it. And a lot of the concept was there and a lot of the different vignettes were there, but there was some stuff that, we needed to fill in. And so much of the because it was a wonderful ensemble cast, wonderful ensemble characters. And a lot of those were filled in, like their dialogue or the things that they were going through, the struggles that they were going through were things that we had witnessed in our own sort of respective Lyft rides. Yep. One came in like 2 months before actual production. It was after Rosie had written a couple of drafts of the script, and we'd already cast the two leads. It was, we were a fly on the wall sitting in the back of our Lyft going to some friend's party, and the driver just starts out of nowhere, just starts like sniffing as if we've offended him. And he was the one who was smelling pickles and was
like,
so
are you guys eating
out
pickles back there?
by the
Like,
smell of pickles.
why would we be eating pickles in your car? No. And he's like, I smell pickles. I hate pickles. We're like, we're not eating pickles.
And so we obviously
home,
thought that was amazing. And by the time we got home, it was, well, we have to use it. And we tried to figure out how we can use it. And we had this wonderful friend, Aaron, and it was my second time working with him. He's a phenomenal comedic actor. And we like, the character's name was actually Aaron. We wrote it for him.
It was going to be like, it's going to be Aaron.
Yeah.
And we're proud of him because it was so funny. He, I think, was very much in that sort of comedy, nerdy mindset because he had just come off a stint on Silicon Valley. So he was very much like ready to play, ready to improv, ready to do comedy.
Yeah.
And he brought it to set. He was so funny that we had a couple takes we couldn't use because you can hear us laughing on the microphone because we were so surprised and so like just cracking up over what he was doing.
Absolutely.
That's great. I love that you're able to incorporate that. And that's the best. You like that. You can't make that up.
No.
I was gonna ask if you guys had any horror stories from Uber rides because I just had a rough one this weekend.
What happened?
Well, I don't know if I have time to get the whole thing, but I was in Fort Worth this weekend down in Texas and getting an Uber, and the first thing, this guy has horrible BO. Just terrible.
Oh, no.
And you're like, great. He had all the windows down, which was good. I don't know if he was aware of it, but so then it's like, well, my hair is going to get messed up, but whatever, it's better. So anyway, we get on to the interstate. So we're on 4 lanes of traffic. And the first thing he says to me is, he looks up in the rearview mirror. So we lock eyes and he says, it's like, it really changes you once you've killed a man. I was like,
what?
So, yeah, so I was like, okay, well, this is fun. And so then he just proceeded to tell me about being in the military for 11 years.
Okay.
Right, it did come back to that.
Better goes in that direction than that he's got people buried in his basement where you're like, I'm gonna take my chances on the freeway.
Lyft driving was just his side hustle. It could be his album as well.
There you go. Yeah. See, that was the thing. Was I was like, I'm not going to ask any questions. I don't want to know anything else. Just that's fine. Maybe he didn't realize, and then he's like, oh, well, I was in the military, so that's why. But I was
conversation starter.
Oh,
yeah, right. Yeah, it's like, well, how are we going to follow that? But one thing I was going to say too is that in those moments when you have dialogue with the driver and the other people, I wrote down like the camera work is so good, and it's not stagnant. And I felt like in this kind of setting, it'd be easy just to sort of have a stationary camera and just have the two people talking. So I'm assuming that was all planned out, but you did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was in collaboration with our director of photography, Dana Feidelson, who's phenomenal. It's the second time working with her. And for me, my challenge as a director was, to your point, what do you do to make, because we had 8 different vignettes, essentially. Like, what do you do to make the space look different or look interesting? And how do you motivate that? Because a lot of the time, this was my first time, this is my first time directing romantic comedy. It's my first time directing comedy since college. And, so much of great comedy is just, a flat shot, because you want to be able to not only see the person who's laughing or doing something funny, but you also want to see the reaction in real time. And so that lent itself very nicely to the device of being in the backseat of the car, because you could just put the camera, right next to the driver and just see this flat shot of the backseat. But one of the things that I loved about this concept that Rosie pitched to me was that it wasn't just a comedy. Yes, there's the romantic elements to it, but there's also some awesome, gravitas to it and some really good teeth to it. And you get to see sort of the emotions that the characters are working through with their respective breakups, that they get to bond over and find solidarity over. And so for those moments, it was so necessary to frame it differently. And so Dana and I had a lot of different conversations about like, well, how do you make this look, visually different than this way and this and that kind of thing. It was actually her idea to really help motivate visually, because originally we were thinking about doing really shooting this outside, in a moving car, and that was a consideration that we had.
But then we realized that was a little bit dangerous.
Yeah. and also we set out to make something that was viable and something that was producible and something that was going to be fun to work with our friends. And as we were working through, and we wanted to use that as kind of the driving force for any for any creative decision that we were going to make on this project. And so that was one of those things where we were asking ourselves, like, this would require we drive late at night, it would be putting our director of photography in danger in case we had to stop short because she'd be, operating the camera and have her back to the dashboard and stuff like that. So it was like the decision ended up being that we could sell as much as we could externally through lighting, through Poor Man's Process Trailer. This idea of the car's moving, the car stops, and she hired this phenomenal gaffer who came with all of his gear, and we motivated stoplights and green lights and cars stopping and passing car lights.
We were physically shaking the car to make it look like it was moving on a road.
It was also fun too because we were able to use a projector to actually put different moving images. When we did the reverse, I didn't want just black behind the drivers, and so it was like, well, how do we fill in that space? And it was really fun because we were able to use a projector and put that, beyond the driver. And a lot of that stuff I shot on my way
driving to set.
And we were able to put it into the computer and put it up into the projector. And I think it looked really well and helped sell sort of the device of the Poor Man's Process Trailer when you're able to see that depth behind one of the characters, which is really nice. But yeah, I mean, it was hard. It was hard, but because it is so easy to just say like, oh yeah, flat shot of the back seat. That's what we can do. And I was like, no, but let's motivate it. So I'm going to do that whenever you want to see all the characters and all the time. But when the characters are going through their own sort of respective things, I don't want to see them in the same frame until something brings them together. And that sort of builds to the climactic thing at the end, which I won't necessarily spoil because we want people to watch it.
But it's a rom-com, so you can take a guess.
You can take a guess. In scene 8, you're going off single, 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 and then you're on the single and you pan to the 2-shot and reveal our fairy godmother at the end too is the driver of the first car and also the last car. So.
And those were also mostly our cars and our cast and crew's cars.
We had 3 total prop cars.
That we had 7 different cars. And I've always known that my car was tiny. You don't realize how tiny your car is until you have to put 2 actors and a film crew in there.
Yeah.
And you're standing behind watching on the monitor like, oh yeah, there's not a lot of space there.
And when you have to, turn the hatchback into a camera port and stuff
like
that.
Yeah. One thing I noticed too that I wrote down, one thing that bothers me in movies and TV is when they're shooting in the interior of a car, they always just have the headrests removed. And I always notice that, and it bugs me because I'm like, I get it. Like it's a cleaner shot when they turn around, you get the full face, but I'm like, it takes me out of it every time. Once you notice it once, you're like, always notice it. And I was like, there are headrests in here. I love it.
Well, that's the kind of stuff that like I noticed as well. I always notice those things because that's not practical. That's not how it actually exists. Yeah. And so that was a way to make it feel as real as possible. I mean, it was fun to be directing the comedy, and in addition to like the headrests, like, okay, how else can you make this space interesting? And so like, what can I give the actors to interact with? And thankfully, both Allie and Bryce, our 2 leads, they're so comedically naturally gifted that they were able to roll with the punches, and they always wanted to like try new things. And so, the case on the back of the passenger, like the front passenger seat.
The scene where they're drunk is basically there's a over the seat holder that had like water bottles and chips in it.
Yeah. And you don't see that necessarily on camera, but that kind of stuff exists in the car. And so it was a cool way to sort of motivate a prop for them to interact with. And that bag of chips, I was like, do you guys want to eat a bag of chips? Because the dialogue, I didn't add anything to that. That was all what Rosie wrote, and they were phenomenal with it. And I was like, do you guys want to, like, maybe you're coming from this pregame where you both got like more drunk than you anticipated. Wouldn't it be fun to like eat a bag of chips if there was a bag of chips in the car? Because sometimes Lyft drivers, like, yeah, they'll have, water and gum, but sometimes they have like a whole cabinet of things, and you're like, holy crap, this is full service. So I wanted to put a bag of chips there, and it was so much fun to see the 2 of them interacting.
And Allie, our actress, she has like dietary stuff and doesn't really get to eat a lot of chips because they just don't sit well with her. And we're like, Allie, you don't have to do that. And she's like, no, are you kidding me? I have a legitimate excuse to eat the thing. I'm eating the chips.
She's gonna do it for the art.
Yeah. Oh yeah, do it for the art.
That's beautiful. That was really fun. So speaking of like you said like the motivated camera movements and that sort of projecting, I wrote down I was wondering about how you write those motivations through the story, because watching this for the 4th time now, I was like, I get caught on this roller coaster every time. The beats hit me just right every time, and it's just like that's such great writing. It's not easy to do, but yeah. So hats off to you, Rosie. But can you talk a little bit about how you like go in? Do you go in like saying, okay, this is like start out here, and then we got a peak, and then valley, and then.
So, well, first off, thank you. I can't believe you watched it 4 times in a row and still want to talk to us about it. That's amazing. I'm going to walk around with an ego for the rest of the day.
What have you done?
But this one was special because, well, the first thing I want to say from a writing standpoint is I said it was inspired by True Offense. It's so quick for people to be like, oh, so which one is you? And it's like, no. Like my mom's like, who's playing you? I'm like, she's not me.
Yeah.
It is based on a series of loose things that have happened, stories that friends have told.
That was our way in.
That was our way in. So from that point on, it's all creativity, right? It's like, how do I use these pieces I have? And so when I had pitched to Nate and we had talked about it, we're like, okay, it happens over a couple nights. And you had to really start this one structurally. So you sort of like what you were saying, you have to look at what the story structure is. And obviously classic writing structure, we all took, 8th grade English. We all know that you go to a climax and you go down to the denouement, whatever. And there's so many books out there about screenwriting structure. And at the end of the day, it's like, know the rules before you break them. And it's like, okay, I want to have a moment. I always say we have to have that all is lost moment. And I'm a sucker for a happy ending. So those were the 2 things I knew I was writing towards. Other than that,
And you have your inciting incident.
And we have the inciting incident. And so all of that was there. And I knew what those big pieces were. And then I had all the different pieces that I wanted to happen. I'm like, okay, there's one where there's drunk. There's one where they're kissing. There's one where it's awkward. There's one where the Uber driver asks her out. There's one where it's accidentally an Uber pool. And so then I literally took those puzzle pieces and I wrote sort of an outline of like what each of those was. And then I wrote all the scenes and then I mashed them together into the script. So this was weird in that normally I'll kind of outline the script and write it straight through. This was like, okay, write this situation, right? Okay, this all happened on one night. This all happened on another night. So it takes place over those 4 nights, and we had to sort of mix and match the pieces so that it flowed right, which resulted in what you described as the roller coaster that you got to ride. So that makes me happy. That means it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. It worked great. And watching it so many times, the thing that I was picking up the last couple times, I was watching the subtlety in the performances was just so great. Like I was watching the other person that wasn't speaking and their reactions and all the stuff that's not going on the surface and seeing that portrayed. They did a wonderful job. So you said you've worked with some of these guys before?
Yeah. So if I may,
yeah, please.
That. So Allie, I'll start with Allie. We met as we were both interns at Disney ABC's General Hospital together, and I was in film school and she was at NYU Tisch for acting, and we became quick friends, and we were like, oh yeah, we'll work together. And then here we are many moons after that, and
don't date us, don't date us.
And I always had wanted to work with her, and it was just sort of like figuring out what the right project was, and this just ended up being sort of the first opportunity that we sent her something, and it was fun because there's Allie, Mac, Jack, and Bryce, and all 4 ended up being in the movie, and we had the 4 of them all read for the lead and the side characters. And so because we were kind of doing like chemistry tests off of how they could work together, because Mac and Jack start opposite each other in my short film Brunch. I'd worked with Bryce because we met him at Syracuse University. We've known him for a long time, and was just trying to figure out where they could fit in. And off of the reads that they sent in, Bryce and Allie had the strongest chemistry for the 2 characters that we needed. And we were able to.
And on top of that, Mac and Jack gave such great performances of the other character work. So we're like, okay, great. We had these 4 roles. We had these 4 actors. We had everybody read for everything. And now from that pool, we can cast.
Yeah.
And the nice part about casting it that way was that there was a role for everybody. You don't have to say, maybe next time.
Yeah.
And it was very lucky too that they were willing to just have fun with us, because it's always fun to make movies. It's even more fun to make movies with people you like. And like Nate said, we had known Jack and Bryce since college, Mac and Allie since not far behind that, and Aaron.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've known Allie since 2013. I've known Mac since 2015. So there was a lot. And prior to rideshare, I'd already worked with Mackenzie 2 or 3 times. No, 4 times at that point.
And the fun thing that all of this builds to is that Allie and Mac, we're in post right now, but Allie and Mac star in our first feature film that we're currently finishing.
Wow. Congrats.
Thank you so much. So actually the first time that they were on screen together was in Rideshare. They share one scene together, and it's fun to like see where they went from that to now starring opposite each other in our first feature.
Which is very different, but also special.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure you guys get this a lot, but what was it like working on this project while being in a relationship?
So you first.
I was just gonna say, thankfully this wasn't our first time collaborating. This was our 3rd short film together, and we had already tackled really difficult subject matter prior to this. Our first collaboration was She and Her, and that was a film that Rosie wrote, I directed, that tackled sexual assault and trauma in the entertainment industry. And so it was like, that was a lot to sink our teeth into. And that was much earlier in our relationship. And prior to even dating, we'd always talked about like, oh yeah, like anecdotally, like, oh, it'd be fun to work together because we met at school.
I was gonna say, that's the timeline you have to go back is, that's the funny part is Nate and I first met sophomore year of college, were in the same group project. And as you can guess, you never like anybody who does a group project with you. So I guess our first impressions of each other weren't as good as they could have been. And so we were kind of just acquaintances throughout college. It wasn't until we both ended up moving to LA and everyone who had graduated with us sort of formed like a little group out here. And that was when we became closer and became friends. And during those years, Nate and I had been like, oh, maybe we should collaborate because
you write and I direct.
And the amazing thing about Nate is he's always making something. And I think a lot of people, I'll say I was drawn to that because you're like, holy shit, this is, can I say bad words?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Sorry, Mom. I was like, holy cow, this Hapke guy, there's such a response to people who don't just talk the talk. And I was like, okay, I would love to work with someone like that, who's that driven, who's that determined. And so I floated the idea to him when we were both, I think, dating other people. And then
Working.
And then a couple years, I didn't float the idea of doing it. And then a couple of years went by and we hadn't worked together and we were both single at the same time, and events that may or may not be similar to rideshare transpired. And
you shared an Uber.
We shared a couple of Ubers. But it wasn't until about a year into dating that we decided to work together because we wanted to make sure like that can get tricky. And if it works well, it works really, really well. And if it doesn't, it can get messy fast. So we wanted to be like, let's ease our way into this. And fortunately it went well and we're like, okay, we can keep doing this, the dating and the movie making.
I love when you say ease our way into this with like such a heavy like, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, that was really like the trying one. And then after that, we made To the Moon and Back, which was this sort of pre-catharsis for me as a writer, which was this, 40-something-year-old man who's grieving his recently passed mother and it's in the moments before he has to eulogize her, and he finds solace in the presence of his wife and daughter. And so this for me was like incredibly personal. And this was a love letter to my mother. And, Rosie jumped on as one of the producers on that and did a phenomenal job. And so we had the experience of She and Her working as writer, director, and then To the Moon and Back. And then we were like, the proof of concept short for the feature that we were working on was something that Rosie had pitched me, and it was super exciting. It was this dark comedy or dramedy, I guess is a way of doing it. And that it sounded great, and then just the budget wasn't there. And then when Rosie pitched me this whole thing, this thing with this romantic comedy that was, pseudo our story, it just felt right. We were coming off these 2 higher profile pieces that had some bigger names attached to it, and we were looking to not only continue making stuff, but also, for me personally, I wanted some kind of return to what I felt in film school, which was like a bunch of friends just get together and they drive somewhere for the weekend and they make something. And
there's no ego, there's no none of that.
And thankfully, that's what Rideshare ended up being. It was an opportunity to work with an incredible ensemble cast, many of which I'd worked with before, but everybody was a friend, and we were just coming together tell this really fun, heartwarming, based on a true story. That was a super long day, and from a technical and planning standpoint was very difficult, but we knocked it out.
Yeah, we did the whole thing in one day, which
Wow.
was a challenge. Small budgets, you gotta really make the most of it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Nate and I both did some time working in soap operas, Nate at General Hospital and me at The End of the Restless, and what they can shoot in a day is amazing. Whereas like a primetime show will be like, we can do 5 pages in a day. General Hospital's like, how about 120? And obviously there are factors, it's all on a stage, it's a more controlled location, but it's multicam. But if you can take sort of those lessons and say, okay, how do we apply those to what we want to make so that we can have the most efficient days?
Yeah.
And honestly, every time that we make it shouldn't surprise me anymore, but every time that we make our wrap time, I'm like, all right, we did it. It worked.
And this one was also like, in the past, it had been, this was an incredible challenge from a technical standpoint, production design standpoint, scheduling, hair and makeup, wardrobe, because it was coordinating 4 different story nights, 7 different car looks with 3 prop cars, and some of them needed reverses.
Mm-hmm.
And the hair and makeup department did a phenomenal job.
Because we had to keep going back and forth between different looks, because we were shooting based on the car versus the wardrobe.
Yeah.
It was a lot to keep straight.
And our production designer, who we'd initially hired, dropped out like 2 or 3 days before we were going to shoot with no like advance notice. It was like, oh, okay. So our amazing PA extraordinaire, Ben Booth, was like, I'll do it. And it was like, okay, great.
And he literally learned how to do the projector thing. He like watched some YouTube videos and got the supplies and figured out how to do it in 2 days.
Yeah, he did that. And we tried to figure out how to make each car look slightly different, because some Lyft drivers just have a really full trunk of like strange things because they're just people. And
Nate's favorite was he arranged, if you look in the back of one of the cars, there are stuffed animals like, and then or something, and Nate was the one who did all those. He's like with a monitor chuckling at that.
Yeah.
But to go back to your question, which we didn't really answer, we talked about how we got to working together as a couple. The actual working together as a couple part, when we're on set, it's actually pretty boring. The answer, because we're just very like, okay, we're on set now, we're director Nate and producer Rosie, because at the end of the day, it's a professional space. We don't ever want to make anyone uncomfortable, and we don't ever want to undermine either of our authority, right? Because you don't want to see me and Nate being mushy coupley, and then it's like, oh, what? I thought you were here at a professional capacity. Now I don't see you as a producer. I see you as the director's girlfriend, or vice versa. It just makes it cleaner and more comfortable for everyone. Mm-hmm. Like, we can take lunch and go for a walk, and I can hold his hand and be like, okay, let's talk about the day. But on set itself, it's just professional. And then the offset stuff is just being aware that there's going to be bleed over and mitigating it. Like, oh, dinner tonight, our date turned into a production meeting. And that's okay, because we will set another date where the production meeting turns into dinner.
Yeah, sure.
It was fun, actually, because I can share a couple of sort of personal experiences with working with you. I mean, like, because I had shot a bunch of things prior to our first collaboration with She and Her, and one of my favorite memories from working on that film was getting to look over at Rosie, because that was a 2-day shoot, and on the first day she had to be in charge of the wardrobe that was in a separate apartment unit, and so you really weren't on set for all the flashbacks that we shot. And so for the first setup on day 2, when Rosie was actually on set, she was in front of the monitor, and I got to look over at her face and like the joy and excitement and just just the wonder that was there.
I was crying. It was like the first professional time I'd seen my words being spoken. Yeah, he's being nice. He's not embarrassing me. I was crying.
But it was that genuine smile that I think was just so amazing. Because if I gave you that note to go show me that, it wouldn't come out. It was something so amazing about me witnessing say your words for the first time on the monitor, which was amazing. But to your question as well, I mean, on rideshare, it was very unique because I have an acting background, and I haven't really been doing it much since we moved to LA. But it was a fun opportunity.
Just a quick same page thing. I was about to tell this story. I was going to be like,
you're in sync from the beginning.
The lead-in is just when you're working with your partner, you know a little bit more about them, so you can pitch things a little more easily. And now I'll let you tell the story.
So we had rounded out the ensemble cast really, really nicely, and I was so proud of it. But there was one character that we hadn't cast yet, and Rosie was like, which was the character of Nick, who's one of the drivers, and Rosie was like, well, you know what? Why don't you do it?
No, I literally thought, like, you were like, who could play this? I was like, no, I thought you could do this. That was my whole pitch for it. You're like, there's a new character, Rosie. We have to cast it because it was revisions. I had given him a new scene that had that. It's like, yeah, but you put a new character, and who are we going to find to do this? I was like, I'm looking at him.
But that was one of those situations where, like, I've acted in stuff that I directed before now, like multiple times, like probably 5 or 6 times since 2013. And it's fun. I think I would much rather prefer, or I would much prefer to act in other people's things. But for this one in particular, because we're talking about rideshare, it was really unique because Rosie and I had worked together twice before, where she understands sort of what my expectations are on set, what I'm looking for in terms of coverage. And for that in particular, because as we've mentioned, there was a 13-hour day on set where we had, you know, 7 different car looks, 4 different wardrobe looks, and hair and makeup looks, 3 different pop cars, 8 different scenes that we had to get through. And I think it was, you know, within those 8 scenes, I think 19 total shots. And we didn't have any time for me to like do a take, get out, watch the daily. And so Rosie and I talked about it before, and I was like, I am going to give myself direction, but here is what I'm expecting from my performance on camera. You're going to be wearing the headphones, watching the monitor. I'm going to look at you after we get through the take, and you're going to give me a thumbs up or no.
No pressure.
And I did. And you said that sounds great. And so, you know, we got through that, and it was really funny because originally when Rosie scripted this thing, it was this nonverbal role that was just supposed to like grunt. But I was in the moment, and Bryce, because it was like her brother, and because I like echoed something that he said. And then he comes back in with the purse, and I just felt like telling him to get, you know, the fuck out. But I just, so for the family, I was like, no, get out. I was like, it was so instinctual, and the intensity was there and whatever. And I turned to Rosie, and Rosie's eyes were like so big.
I was like,
yeah. And I was like, I'm sorry, I need to like, you know, whatever. I just was reacting. She was like, no, it was great. Do it again.
Because the thing is, and I've gotten better at this, when you start writing, your words are so precious to you.
Oh yeah.
And I've like, in my college days, before I knew better, like actually gotten snippy at directors for changing things without telling me. And ultimately, you want the respect of someone at least telling you. But at the end of the day, the material has to live and it has to change. And so if a line is going to play better said differently by the actors, more power to you. We're all trying to make the best thing possible. So I don't care who comes up with the line if the line works. I mean, half of what Aaron's actions were in the back of that car were improv. And they were hilarious.
It was
every take was different.
It's fun because I think I'm learning also. When I was younger, I think it was like feeling like I need to micromanage every single bit of an actor's performance. And now, because I've worked with a lot of different people, and I've worked with a lot of different types of actors, and also just in general, like through experience, I'm realizing so much more that I just need to put people in a position to succeed. And Aaron was looking for guidance on that day regarding like, oh, what if I try this? What if I try this? And I just said yes, because he understood what the camera was, what the coverage was, what the scene was, what the scene was about. And he very much was just this obstacle from these 2 people having this very important conversation. And it's like the comedy's just there, and he's a naturally funny person. And, you know, he kept on pitching these ideas. And for me, it was like, my brain is not operating on the same wavelength that you are. We cast you for a reason, and we trust you like with this, and I trusted him fully with that. And so when he would try something else, I was like, yeah, please do this again, and like maybe do this. But like a lot of those idiosyncrasies that he brought to it were just him. I mean, it's hard to like give that. And he brought that in. It's because, you know, we cast him and we knew he could do it. Yeah.
He's hilarious. There was also a moment when the seatbelt literally got stuck, but he just kind of kept going with it, and it became a really funny beat because there were so many good happy accidents like that.
That's brilliant. Well, I'm glad you guys can work together so well, and I'm excited to see your work coming up here in your feature. But for Rideshare, loyal listeners, you can watch that right now at the South Dakota Film Festival. Go to southdakotafilmfest.org and watch it. Today's the 25th, the last day of it, so go check it out. It's so much fun. Yeah, hurry, get over there. But before we go, what's this feature called? Can we talk about it? Is there a way we can follow you guys to keep updated?
Yeah, for sure. So the feature is called 2-11.
And it's currently in post-production, so hopefully that'll be hitting the festival circuit too. The best place to stay for updates is on if you want to check on Instagram, Small Tall Prod, because we're Small Tall Productions. You can't see it because A, we're sitting down, and B, this is a podcast, but Nate is much taller than me, so that's the name of our production company, Small Tall. But Instagram at Small Tall Prod, and then from there it links to all the other social medias. But that's where we post updates on Rideshare and where it's going to be screening, the other shorts we made since, and where we're posting all of our updates on the upcoming feature.
Yeah, we're in the next 2 or 3 weeks we'll be dropping the trailer and the poster for 2-11. So.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing all that. And as always, loyal listeners, you can find me on Twitter at Luke Larson89. Find this podcast at L Squared Podcast on Instagram, on Twitter at L2 Podcast, on Facebook. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. But,
all platforms.
All of them. Yeah, finally. But thank you guys again so much for coming on. This was a lovely chat. And let's do it again sometime.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for having us.
Until next time.